Is religious belief a default setting for humans? Cambridge professor Tim Whitmarsh claims that ancient history suggests that atheism is as natural to humans as religion. He also views monotheism, or the dominance of monotheistic religions in our culture, as an anomaly that requires explanation. How did we fall into the trap of being dominated for such a long time by this strange idea that there is only one God? For the vast majority of our history, this idea was unthinkable. Anyway, in this review, I'll provide you with some basic arguments from Whitmarsh's book, Battling the Gods, Atheism in the Ancient World, and from his chapter in the Cambridge History of Atheism. By the way, I've decided to create a series of videos on my channel exploring the history of atheism from ancient times to the present day. And if you are interested in this topic, please remember to hit the notification button so you won't miss any of these insightful reviews. Whitmarsh claims that both so-called new atheists and their religious opponents are mistaken in their understanding of the roots of atheism. He disagrees with the common idea that atheism is a modern invention, a product of the European Enlightenment. People often think that without a secular government and scientific progress, atheism couldn't even exist. But Whitmarsh says this isn't true. He believes both sides of the argument are responsible for spreading this misunderstanding. Many modern atheists link religious skepticism to scientific progress. On the other hand, many religious people often see atheism as a pathological symptom of a decadent Western world consumed by capitalism. And in this picture, both sides see atheism as something relatively new. But Whitmarsh says that disbelief in the supernatural is as old as the hills, and it is cross-cultural. In other words, he argues against religious universalism, suggesting that religion is not hardwired into humanity. Anyway, here is what you may expect from this video. First, I'll explain why Tim Whitmarsh believes it is crucial to recognize that religious skepticism has deep roots, and why to him it is a human rights issue. Second, I'll briefly provide examples of past religious skeptics that the author uses to support his point. Thirdly, I'll delve into the reasons behind the gradual disappearance of religious skepticism in the Roman Empire, and why it nearly faded away until the 16th or even 17th century. And finally, I'll switch to critique and discuss potential shortcomings in Whitmarsh's position. And towards the end of the presentation, for those interested, I'll display on the screen some quotes from religious skeptics in ancient Greece and Rome. The author argues that if we travel back 2500 years to ancient Greece, we would find debates between atheists and believers much like those happening today. Whitmarsh points out that many people in ancient times, like some today, believed that gods didn't exist. They thought early humans made up gods to explain natural events, and these superstitions should be left behind. They felt they live in a modern society where gods aren't needed and religion is fading away, or that future generations would see their beliefs as foolish myths. Yet, 2500 years later, we are still having similar debates. Whitmarsh also explains why it's crucial to understand the history of atheism. It's not just intellectual matters, but also has to do with morals and politics. If religious belief is treated as deep and ancient, and disbelief as recent, then atheism can readily be dismissed as faddish and inconsequential. Then he suggests that in this case, even the persecution of atheists can be seen as a less serious problem than the persecution of religious minorities. Therefore, knowing the deep history of atheism becomes a part of human rights issue. It is about recognizing atheists as real people deserving of respect, tolerance, and the opportunity to live their lives unmolested. Whitmarsh accuses some modern atheists who portray religion as belonging to an earlier, more primitive stage of human development, of suggesting that ancient people weren't capable of critical thinking like we are today, and that they needed modern scientific knowledge for skepticism. By doing this, they imply that religion is normal for humans, while disbelief is abnormal. Of course, he challenges this view. He argues that disbelief likely existed in all culture throughout history. Of course, it's difficult to identify atheists in ancient cultures because evidence is often complex and elusive. Also, literacy was scarce, and also the word itself, atheos, had a different meaning in ancient Greek than it does now. But in the Cambridge History of Atheism, Whitmarsh writes, it is, however, also demonstrably true that there were in Greek antiquity atheists in a sense that we would recognize today, just as there have no doubt been in every culture throughout history. He also explains that since Christianity believes in a single omnipotent deity, atheism is often viewed as lacking belief in that same deity. However, ancient Greek religion was polytheistic, which means they believed in multiple gods, and centered more around collective ritual than individual belief. Therefore, the term atheism was used more broadly, sometimes to mean disbelief in a deity whatsoever, and sometimes more broadly to refer to a stance that was more skeptically inclined towards established religion. Despite these challenges, Whitmarsh believes that there were likely people who didn't believe in gods in ancient China and other societies. However, we have more written records from Greek sources, making it easier to find evidence of atheism in that region. He also acknowledges that the evidence we have mostly coming from educated men in Greek and Roman society. Of course, this doesn't mean only elites were atheists. It's just that these are the only sources available to us. Also, accounts of Greek religion and culture have almost always been written from the point of view of the believers. Therefore, it gives the impression that ancient religion was a smoothly functional system with no glitches. But Whitmarsh wants to restore opinion of religious skeptics and show the other side. And this connects with another interesting book by Professor Mitchell Stevens from New York University, titled Imagine There Is No Heaven: How Atheism Helped Create the Modern World. Stevens discusses skeptics towards religious claim in various ancient cultures such as India, Egypt, Babylon, Buddhist culture, Central Africa, and Oceania. While Whitmarsh's book focuses on ancient Greece and Rome, Stevens's work covers history up to the 21st century, so I recommend it to anyone interested in the history of skepticism and atheism. It provides easy-to-read insights into both famous and ordinary skeptics from ancient times to today. Another remarkable book is by social anthropologist Johannes Quack from the University of Zurich, Disenchanting India: Organized Rationalism and Criticism of Religion in India. Quack discusses organized rationalists in India, asserting that skepticism towards religion wasn't solely introduced by Europeans. Even without Western influence, there were many skeptics in India throughout history. This is significant because some in India view rationalists as agents of the West who impose foreign ideas. But local rationalists argue that materialistic ideas have always existed in India, tracing back to ancient times. For instance, Dr. Bhattacharya extensively wrote on the history of science, materialism, and rationalism in India. Again, as you may see, there is an opinion that atheism isn't just a result of scientific progress in the Western world. Some scholars argue that skepticism and materialism have always been part of human nature across different cultures and throughout history. Whitmarsh also explains that the physical geography of Greece played a major role for the political diversity that let those people think so freely. Greece had over 1,000 separate city-states, each with its own customs and traditions. This meant that apart from language, culture, and religion, there was no uniform standard to bind Greeks together. Priests had only a civic, not a political or moral function, and there was no sacred text or authoritative clergy to dictate lifestyle and moral principles. Also, the gods had little to do with the law. Gods were in the natural world rather than transcendent, with no required spiritual dimension. What is also important is that there was little interest in generating religious orthodoxy. For example, that everyone must practice their religion or believe only this way or that way. As Whitmarsh writes, the idea of a priest telling you what to do was alien to the Greek world, and soon you'll understand why it was so important. Additionally, the author explains that the Greeks lacked sacred texts like the Bible, Vedas, or Quran. Homer and Hesiod were open to reinterpretation by anybody. The Hellenic gods didn't possess the absolute power as monotheistic God, and they didn't offer clear moral guidance. Instead, they were often depicted as amoral. According to Whitmarsh, persecution of freethinkers and scientists was rare in antiquity, as most Greeks easily tolerated skepticism about their own religion. In his work, Whitmarsh presents early examples such as the atheistic writing of Xenophanes from the 6th century BCE. It means that the atheist history dates back to at least as far as monotheism and predates Christianity and Islam. Even Plato, writing in the 4th century BCE, acknowledged that contemporary non-believers were not the first to have had this view about the gods. In the 21st century, there exists a well-documented prejudice against atheists, often portraying them as immoral or amoral, or that atheism necessarily leads to moral degradation. Whitmarsh shows that this prejudice is ancient, and that atheophobia dates back at least as far as Plato. Plato, in his 10th book of the Dialogue on Laws, advocated draconian measures against atheists and even those we might consider deists. Plato's recommended punishment for atheists was death. At best, he believed that such people must be isolated from society. He considered non-believers to be possessed by disease and regarded them as state criminals who would provoke societal disturbance if left unchecked. Whitmarsh also mentions Hippo of Samos, who proposed a fully material cosmos without a place for the gods. He also seemed to reject the idea of a human soul. Anaxagoras also proposed a largely materialistic model of the cosmos. Additionally, Prodicus of Chios developed a theory about the origin of religion as a social practice, suggesting that beings worshipped as gods were originally human beings. The book provides dozens of such religious skeptics and offers detailed explanation, but sorry, I won't go into details. Instead, I'll present some of them at the end of this video. Finally, Whitmarsh tries to explain why religious skepticism became almost impossible. Why did we come to regard atheism as some sort of pathology and a much bigger problem than it was for some Greeks? In his opinion, the problem was Christianity or monotheist absolutism combined with absolutist politics. It has generally proved more hostile to freedom of thought than the acceptance of diverse polytheistic beliefs. In other words, Christianity marked the end of a long period during which many respectable thinkers had explored radical ideas about the nature of gods, even to the point of dismissing them altogether. But monotheists demanded adherence to a single true God. As Whitmarsh explains, Constantine and his successors used Christianity to unify the Roman Empire, and now atheos became the term for the absence of belief in this Christian God. Under Christianity, there was simply no good way of being an atheist. Atheism was the absolute rejection of the very premise on which Christians defined themselves. The author writes, in AD 380, Theodosius I issued a decree from Thessalonica that pronounced Christianity the official religion of the empire and ordered all subjects to follow it. This was the making of Catholicism, Christianity in its orthodox form, approved by the emperor. According to the edict, those who submitted to this particular theological orthodoxy, treating the Trinity as a single deity, according to the findings of the Council of Nicaea, were entitled to call themselves Catholics. All the rest, no distinction is drawn between polytheists, atheists, Jews, and theologically unsound Christians, were judged demented lunatics, branded heretics, and threatened with punishment both divine and imperial. A year later, Theodosius came up with another edict insisting that those who did not profess the Nicene version of the faith should be branded and driven from all cities. In other words, Theodosius redefined the very nature of religion, which was no longer merely normative practice. It has become a defined set of beliefs authorized by descent from Nicaea, and now issuing out of the mouth of the Roman ruler. For the first time in the history of the Greco-Roman world, political authority was systematically boring down into the hearts and minds of individual subjects, comparing them to set standards of correctness, and then rewarding or punishing them accordingly. This was the real ideological revolution engendered by the Christianization of the empire, the alliance between absolute power and religious absolutism. This law enforced the idea that the health and prosperity of everyone in the empire depended fundamentally upon the adoption of not just the right religion, but the right theological position on the right religion. And as Whitmarsh explains, like all successful techniques of social control, this new focus on religious identity also involved identifying and stigmatizing outsiders. Non-Christians can be branded on their bodies and driven from cities out into the countryside. Christians also invented a negative nickname for non-Christians or people holding the old Roman religion. It was pagans, which meant rustics. Later, the grandson of the first Theodosius created new laws against heresy and apostasy. People were labeled as orthodox and heretics, and what's interesting is that heresy should be treated as a crime against the state, since any crime committed against divine religion is treated as an aggression against everyone. The author reminds that there is even legislation against remembering heretics. No one shall recall to memory a Manichaean or a Donatist. There shall be one Catholic worship, one salvation. Apostates, those who renounce Christianity, are to be isolated from the rest of community and forbidden to pass on property to their heirs. There were laws protecting Jews, but Jews are also forbidden from trying to convert Christians or owning Christian slaves. Traditional Greco-Roman polytheism that was deemed superstition must disappear, temples to be closed, sacrifices to be abolished. Those who sacrifice or worship cult images shall be fined or put to death. Even public debate about religion is banned. Whitmarsh recognizes, of course, that the extent to which these policies were put into practice has been debated, but at the very least they provide a powerful rhetorical case for the exclusion of everything but Nicene Christianity. This way, the Theodosian Code defines Catholic Christianity in opposition to all other religions or even versions of Christianity. They were condemned as manifestations of madness and heresy and threatened with state violence. Such a scenario would have been unimaginable in polytheistic Rome. Such decrees left no room for disbelief. Under Theodosius II, not only pagan temples and statues were destroyed, but many ancient Greek and Roman writings were burned or neglected. And this way, the empire cut itself from the great intellectual treasure accumulated by ancient scientists and philosophers. As Whitmarsh explains, the Christianization of the Roman Empire put the end to serious philosophical atheism for over a millennium. The word itself indeed acquired an additional meaning, which was wholly negative. Rather than the rational critique of theism as a whole, it came to mean simply the absence of belief in the Christian God. What's also interesting is that Christian heretics were also called atheists, and not because they didn't believe in the Christian God, but because they did not believe in him in the right way. Therefore, religious sectarian hostility, which had been rare in the polytheist world, became a regular feature of life. The very idea of holy war against unbelievers had put in its first appearance. Religious difference for just about the first time in Mediterranean antiquity had become the driver of conflict. This way, as Whitmarsh explains, the arrival of Catholic Christianity meant the end of ancient atheism in the West. Once it had been established that the paradigm of true versus false religion was the only one that mattered, there was nowhere to place atheism on the mental map. Which means all philosophical debates were already framed between Christian monotheism, and those who still had some doubts became simply invisible, and they did not leave any historical records for us to trace them. But what's really weird is that in the beginning, even Christian apologists used philosophical materials from the classical atheists against polytheists. For some reason, Christians decided to ignore that the same arguments could be applied to their religious beliefs as well. Eventually, Whitmarsh comes to the conclusion that it is this blind spot that has sustained the illusion that disbelief outside the post-Enlightenment West is unthinkable. The apparent rise of atheism in the last 2 centuries, however, is not a historical anomaly. Viewed from the longer perspective of ancient history, what is anomalous is the global dominance of monotheistic religions and the resultant inability to acknowledge the existence of disbelievers. In other words, Whitmarsh sees the rise of monotheistic religions as an anomaly, and we humans need to understand how and why did we come to such a strange conclusion that there is only one God. After all, it is a very novel idea to us, but it became so dominant in our world. And now I'll allow myself to express some critique. While Tim Whitmarsh claims that it was Christian monotheism that suppressed the freedom of thought and that religious monopoly caused persecution against religious skeptics, some suggest that one of the most important historic events that advanced the atheistic thought was the acceptance of monotheism. Why? Because just consider this. If everyone around you believes in 100 gods and you come along saying they're all wrong and that out of 100 gods only one is real while the rest 99 are false, by doing so you're getting them closer to the point where it becomes easier to reject this only remaining God. This doesn't necessarily mean Whitmarsh is wrong, but we should also consider this aspect. The idea of monotheism likely helped our ancestors move to the next step towards the disenchantment of the world. Another significant event, of course, was the Protestant Reformation of the 16th century. Though driven by religious motives, it sparked doubt and a diversity of opinions. In a sense, it opened the Pandora box that led to what Max Weber called the disenchantment of the world. By accepting Protestantism, many Europeans had to deny belief in many miracles, in holy relics, icons, and so on. Many sacred things turned out to be false. So Europeans had to rethink many of their supernatural beliefs. And another great historic event had to do with the Age of Discovery, but that is a topic for later videos on this channel. For now, let's return to Tim Whitmarsh and classical antiquity. While he argues that in the ancient world there were many atheists, it is really hard to prove that any of them rejected absolutely all supernatural beliefs. Yes, they criticized religion, they mocked the very idea of gods, but did they really deny all supernatural assumptions? Unfortunately, to my knowledge, we don't have such proof. And finally, Whitmarsh disputes the idea that religion is natural to humans while non-religion is unnatural. He's probably right that skepticism was always part of our nature, and of course he doesn't go as far as Freud, who claimed that it's vice versa, religion should be seen as a pathology or infantilism, while atheism is a healthy state of mind. Whitmarsh takes a more moderate stance. At the same time, many scholars, who are by the way themselves atheists, like Jared Diamond or David Sloan Wilson, argue that religious thinking was an evolutionary adaptation that benefited our species by helping us survive in large groups. Cognitivists such as Pascal Boyer or Aran Aranzayan also agreed that religious thinking comes more naturally to the human brain. According to them, it's much harder for the human brain to be atheist, as it requires conscious decision and extra cognitive effort. So I don't want to say that Whitmarsh is wrong, but I'm just trying to say that the other side of the argument also has points to justify their position, and it's hard to say who is right. Probably Whitmarsh even would agree that while it is natural to be both religious and non-religious, becoming non-religious indeed requires extra effort. Let's conclude. As you can see, Tim Whitmarsh is deeply concerned with the fact that the voices of religious freethinkers from antiquity have been nearly forgotten. He explains that in 18th and 19th century Europe, those advocating for a world without gods were well versed in classical history. They could appeal to the authority of Epicurus and Lucretius or mention Diagoras of Milos in their debates. But since the early 20th century, many skeptics and atheists start ignoring these great minds. Whitmarsh even blames the educational system for our collective ignorance about the long history of atheism. He writes that the educational system fails to acknowledge the crucial role of Greco-Roman thought in the shaping of Western secular modernity. This loss of consciousness of the classical heritage is what has allowed the modernist mythology to take root. It is only through profound ignorance of the classical tradition that anyone ever believed that 18th century Europeans were the first to battle the gods. Another conclusion we can draw is that to protect freedom of thought, and by extension freedom of worship, all states need laws and institutions to keep religion out of politics. For without inalienable human rights, democracy can easily become the tyranny of the many. In addition, this book teaches us another lesson. If people 2500 years ago predicted the decline of religion and its imminent disappearance, yet in the 21st century religion remains strong in many societies, perhaps we must be more humble in assuming that religion will inevitably fade away in the near future. Who knows, maybe 2500 years from now people will still hold beliefs in magic and superstition. Yes, their prophets and gods might be different, but will they live in a disenchanted reality? It's hard to say. My friends, as always in this video, I'm simply presenting the author's ideas. Feel free to agree or disagree with Tim Whitmarsh and share your thoughts in the comments below. From my side, I believe it is an amazing book and I highly encourage you to read it. Please don't forget to like or dislike this video. Special thanks to my patrons on Patreon, Daber and Adam, and special thanks to Evan Clark and Atheists United for supporting this series on the history of atheism. Finally, here are a few quotes from ancient skeptics. I wish you peace and health wherever you are.